Oftentimes, when we talk about wokeness creeping into and destroying our institutions, it's talked about in the context of entertainment, film, TV, movies, and I get why this is done, because those are things that people broadly know about, it has broad appeal, and we can all understand when something that we love, something that we follow, something that we care about, is being ruined by the inclusion of these activists in the writing room, behind the director's chair, etc., etc. But talking about wokeness only in this regard leads to the snickering, leads to people leaving you smug comments about how, does it really matter? Is this really the thing we should be focusing on? Is society really being harmed by this? But the thing is, wokeness is affecting not just the entertainment institution, but multiple other institutions meant to serve people that are in desperate straits, and that's what we're going to talk about today, because the Washington Free Beacon has broken a story about a domestic violence shelter going so woke that they were actually discriminating against their employees and discouraging the victims of domestic violence who are victims of color from getting out of those situations, because you know it's worse than being beaten or killed by your domestic partner? The racist institution that is policing. Now, we're going to get into this. We're going to do a deep dive into the story. Again, credit to the Washington Free Beacon, but first, we have a sponsor, so we're going to throw it over to them, throwing motion, and then we're going to bring it back over here and talk about it on the other side. How many times have you seen something that you loved be updated into something woke, unfunny, uninteresting, and you just felt sour about it? How many times have you asked yourself, where is the good art? Where's the good stuff that's uncensored, unfiltered, totally independent of this woke garbage? Well, today I have the answer for you, my friends, and that, of course, is Flip City Magazine. Flip City Magazine is hilarious all the way through. This thing is like Mad Magazine before it went woke, and it holds no bars, it's 100% independent, and they're fully committed to free speech. The issue I'm holding right now has an amazing cover featuring Kyle Rittenhouse and a Count Dankula interview that's exclusive to the magazine. But the real reason I love Flip City, other than the amazing art, other than the effort that you could see on every single page, is the fact that they put comedy first. This thing is hilarious from front to back, and they're not afraid to go after people in the conservative movement that need a little bit of making fun of. Check out this section on Conservative Inc. When's the last time you saw anybody on the right-wing side take some shots at their own side? That is proof positive of their commitment to comedy that you could see on every single page of this magazine. So do yourself a favor, go over to flipcitymag.com and get yourself a subscription. Or you could check out the pinned link top of the comments of this video or the top of the description box and get it there. It's amazing. You'll be laughing all the way through it. That's flipcitymag.com. So recently, a discrimination claim has been filed against the organization known as Women Against Abuse. And what this organization was pre-George Floyd, because 2 months after George Floyd they had a complete and utter change, was an organization that provided shelter, legal representation, and all manner of support to the victims of domestic violence in order to get them out of the tough situations that they were in. They worked with the state legislature, federal legislatures, city council, and with the police department in order to secure safe passage for victims out of these very tense and horrible situations that, honestly, absent support from an external organization like this, a lot of these people would not be able to get themselves out of. However, all that changed, as I said, 2 months after the death of George Floyd, when the institution decided to devote themselves to being an anti-racist, fully multicultural institution, and they started hiring racial diversity and equity counselors to do an audit of their institution. Now, of course, these are race grifters that are meant to inject more racism into an institution in order to fight phantom racism, and what this has to do with George Floyd, who the hell knows, other than the fact that this is a guy who in his past abused a woman. Now, I'm not saying that has anything to do with what happened to him with Officer Chauvin or whatever, but it is ironic that a man who abused a woman in his past had such a negative impact on a women's abuse support group. Now, by the month of November, this organization that used to be about serving all the victims of domestic violence that came into their institution was already offering black employees more pay than white employees based solely on the fact that they are black, and spent a lot of time bickering about whether or not they should count Jewish people as white oppressors or the victims of white supremacy. Again, this is an organization that is supposed to be serving the victims of domestic violence. This prompted attorney Nicole Levitt to file a discrimination claim because the institution seemed to be focusing on berating and humiliating their white employees for thinking the wrong wrong things. And since this organization that the discrimination claim was filed is based out of Philadelphia, they had record domestic violence homicides in the year that all this was going on. She felt not only like the discrimination was wrong, but it was clearly destroying this institution as they were ignoring the victims that they exist to serve. Now, as the Free Beacon reports, these policies weren't just implemented from the employees within this organization. They actually came courtesy of somebody who used to work for the Clinton Global Initiative, a woman called Regina Arrington. I'm gonna go with Regina for the pronunciation of her name. I think that's the most accurate pronunciation, if I'm being fair. Now, Regina was immediately, based on the fact that they were trying to inject all these woke politics into this institution, was given a senior position at this organization, and she immediately used that position to inject racial politics into every aspect of the organization until their original mission was completely lost. And we've seen similar things like this happen at the Sierra Club, the ACLU, very notable one. They used to protect freedom of speech. Remember, they defended Charlottesville and their right to protest when they were denied a permit, and now all of a sudden they're talking about getting transgender child abusers into female prisons when even the state of New Jersey, Democratic run as it is, doesn't want that person in a female prison. Now, one of the things that these diversity consultants often do is make sure you get more diversity consultants. So aside from Regina Arrington, they actually hired another group that specialized in stamping out white supremacy. Remember that when you're donating to this organization that is supposed to exist to fight domestic violence and secure shelter and safe passage for women from their domestic abusive partners, that they're spending all this money hiring these outside race grifting consultants that are talking about getting rid of the evil white supremacy that's supposedly in this organization designed to help the victims of domestic violence. And this culture change was major. They used to do presentations on how women could get help. They used to do presentations for women and print out materials that showed them where they can get in contact with law enforcement, how they can get out of their homes, how they can get their children safely out of their homes, and provide legal representation in case there was a custody battle or whatever, get them restraining orders, whatever they needed to get out of those situations. However, it completely shifted, and they started producing materials about defunding and abolishing the police. In fact, they took it a step further by encouraging the black victims of domestic violence. And remember, we're talking about something based in the city of Philadelphia, so the majority of the violence is black people that we're talking about, from calling law enforcement, from getting out of the situation. Essentially, they were putting forward the idea that domestic violence is actually power plus domestic violence. On their website, they actually posted it's often unsafe for black victims, victims of color, and immigrant victims to reach out to the police for help. The police have never been the solution to violence against women, asserted one PowerPoint presentation, which staffers were required to attend in May of 2021. The presentation also had defund the police safety planning and counseled restorative justice as an approach to domestic violence that used community-based organizations. Now look, we've seen in other stories, very prominent one out of Texas, that sometimes the police fail. Sometimes our other institutions fail. In fact, one of the reasons why this nonprofit exists is to fill the gaps that are in our legal system in order to aid people in this specific situation. But the idea that you're going to resolve domestic violence and violent threats to a woman by her domestic partner by social justice and getting together a community to enforce an informal restraining order and demand restorative justice is absurd. It's insane, and this is what this organization was doing. And one of the things that people don't realize about domestic violence organizations is that a lot of them end up being members in a larger organization that verifies their practices for safety in order to have some standard across the country so that you can know when you go to this institution, they're not going to do more harm than good. And the organization that I'm referring to is called the Sanctuary Institute, which actually credits these domestic violence nonprofits when they have the best practices for dealing with the victims of trauma. However, what the audit found early on was that the practices put forward and recommended by this organization were actually white supremacy. So they left this organization, thus making them about as trustworthy as an unaccredited university. And what's even more insane is that the reason they jettisoned their membership from this organization is because the white supremacy they were talking about was the idea that you would provide comfort to the victims of trauma rather than calling the victims of trauma out for their microaggressions that are clearly undergirded by white supremacy. So essentially, this organization decided after their racial equity audit that the idea of helping all the victims of domestic violence, that's white supremacy. What you need to do is make sure that black, minority, and immigrant victims of domestic violence never contact the police, they never get restraining orders, they never get any actual help, because the community will come together and make some restorative justice, whatever, sprinkle some pixie dust on the situation, and that will be solved. But when you have white victims come in, what you gotta do with those white victims is call them racist and white supremacists. And it gets even worse as I go through this article, because what this organization also wanted to do was force all of its employees to sign a statement saying that all white people are racist, and I am not the exception. They would also just push negative stereotypes about white people all day, every day. Again, this is supposed to be an organization to help people with domestic violence, and this created a toxic work environment where people were at each other's throats over racial issues, even according to their own audit after they instituted all these changes from the original racial and equity audit. Now, things really came crashing down when an article came out, and you guys might remember this, about the upper echelon of Black Lives Matter having a bunch of questionable anti-Semitic connections and anti-Semitic views. Levitt, the employee at the center of this discrimination claim, said that she hopes that Black Lives Matter, which she believed to be was a good organization, actually speaks out against anti-Semitism, but what ultimately ended up happening in response to that innocuous comment was that she was publicly shamed and humiliated by the organization, saying that her hoping that Black Lives Matter would change in this regard was a slap in the face to every single black and brown employee at the company, and then that's when they instituted the more pay for black people against white people, which of course is patently absurd and illegal. Now, they would also describe white supremacy and white people as a smog that pollutes everything, that minorities are forced to breathe in and breathe out. They also wanted all the white attorneys to sign a contract for racial affinity spaces, effectively instituting segregation in this shelter, and you had spaces in this place for white families that were separate from all the minorities, because we all know that when you're trying to help victims of domestic violence, it's very important to separate out the white ones because they're still perpetrators of white supremacy. Now, Levitt, of course, refused to sign this, and by the way, this was a 15 commandment thing, and I will read you her quote on why she refused to do so. "I found the idea of being separated into groups by skin color to be inherently racist and regressive, not to mention against the law. I refuse to take part in the scapegoating and demonizing of an entire race. Anyone with a sense of history will tell you that things didn't tend to go well when that happened." Obviously, Levitt is 100% right on that, and again, while we're focusing on all the manners of discrimination that were going on in this organization that is meant to help women who are the victims of domestic violence, I just want to emphasize that the purpose of this organization is to help women that are victimized by domestic violence, and yet it's been corrupted, it's been taken over by this woke ideology to the point where they're not even serving the purpose of that mission. They're creating a toxic work environment, incentivizing discrimination, and they're actually leaving black and other minority women in the arms of their domestic abusers to die based on fictitious notions about the police being somehow inherently white supremacists and therefore worse, while berating the victims of white domestic abusers because, you know, white supremacy is still what's in your abuse and you need to correct that. It's nonsensical, it's crazy, but it's happening, and if you want to read more about it, I will link the full article in the description below, and I will be following this lawsuit as more stuff comes out through Discovery because it needs to be stopped. These race hustlers and racial grifters are everywhere. They've permeated throughout our society, and there was an explosion of them post George Floyd, and they're infecting all manner of our institutions, and it's not just changing around some characters in some TV shows. Sometimes it's incredibly serious with incredibly sensitive organizations that we need to function in their proper way for us to have a more cohesive society that cares about crime and protects the victims. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, then show me by leaving a like. Subscribe for more content. Follow me on all my social medias. Support me via the support links in the description box of this video. This has been me talking about a domestic violence shelter losing their mission. Till next time.